It looks like we may have an entitled officer's wife here that writes an entire opinion piece about how she feels like her unpaid labor is something that the military needs to recognize and should probably pay her for her services. Is this playing into the traditional aspect or idea that we say these dependent potamuses, whatever nickname you want to have for these women or men, I should add that as well, are they just people that are sitting on the military system trying to act entitled off of their husband's ranks? Or do these pressures that are informal create a major toxic environment of free labor that's expected? It is an open secret. The Navy thrives not just on the labor of sailors, but also on the unpaid labor of military families. This has become more glaringly obvious to me as my spouse has risen to now the rank of commander, and there's been an increasing expectation that I will devote my time in support of his career, most notably with my invitation to attend a week-long course on how to be a spouse of a commanding officer. Don't you think this course might actually be to ensure that you are able to have tools to more effectively understand his role as a commanding officer of possibly a naval vessel that could be very stressful and have more tasks or responsibilities? I would actually commend the U.S. military for trying to bring a spouse into the workplace or on base and say, listen, these are things you might want to anticipate. I'd be surprised if any husband would really be mad that you would take a vested interest in his job to understand that he's probably going to not be at home as much as you would like him to be and understand the stress he's under. She then continues to say, historically, there's been an expectation in the Navy that the CO spouse would act as a mini CO or commanding officer to the ship spouses. They organize get-togethers during deployments and hold an honorary role in the ship's fleet readiness group. They are often expected to play a part in ship events, help plan certain events, and act as a resource to sailor and officer spouses alike. To me, this sounds like a lot of unpaid labor. I have no interest in knocking Navy spouses, overwhelmingly women, at any level who are interested in volunteering their time and energy to supporting their command. I commend them as a human being. I also want to spend my time creating a vibrant community in my spouse's command and sharing whatever resources I can with those around me. What I have a problem with is the pervasive, unstated expectation that spouses should participate in unpaid labor. I think you may have held on to this role a little bit too tight when you're looking at this from the expectation that you are expected to be this mini CO, commanding officer. You as a civilian have the entire right and privilege to choose how close or distant you are from the U.S. military. From these statements, I have to say, it sounds like you're having an issue or difficulty with creating boundaries to say no. Why do you feel like you are the sole person that is required to do this? Everything. I would say, if anything, you could learn from your husband and his officer job as a commanding officer to delegate tasks onto other people and understand you are not expected to be the sole living, breathing embodiment of a military spouse. In my view, women in American society feel they need to do everything they can to support those around them. That was evident in the mass exodus of women from the workforce during the COVID-19 crisis, as a lack of child care kept more women than men home. For military families where there is added stress from deployments and moves, the instinct is to want to support others in the same proverbial boat. There's guilt associated with standing up and saying that it's unfair for the military to exploit the time and energy of military spouses, as though we're being ungrateful instead of insisting our efforts are meaningful. No, I'm just going to tell you that it would be expected. I scratch your back, you scratch my back. That is what communities do all the time. That has been how human beings have evolved to where we're at right now. That is how we are living and breathing through this, because we have people interchange and do things for one another even before money existed. Now money exists so we can exchange things, but that's besides the point. This has been going on since the beginning of humankind. I will say the officer community is known to be quite political as far as this goes. I understand there is a stress of trying to make your husband look the most family man as possible to make sure he's liked by his peers and also his superiors. Military spouses already have a hard enough time maintaining careers. Most of us are unemployed or underemployed. Our hopes that will begin to change as more employers are opening up to remote workforces in the wake of COVID-19. But for now, it's still very much a reality that military spouses have a difficult time working due to frequent moves, lack of adequate childcare, and deployments, among other issues. It feels cruel then for military to nudge spouses towards key roles in the health of the command and not compensate them for it. I do agree with her on this point. There are many spouses that have degrees and things like that get stationed overseas and do these very remote tours where they don't have all of the remote job options that are available, or maybe even a job that's even available on the base locally for maybe a specialty that they have, while they're sitting there not being able to use their skills, maybe decaying away at some of those skills. I've seen doctors, I've seen chiropractors, I've seen nurses, I've seen so many professionals that have worked overseas as volunteer to even keep up those things because they're trying to ensure they can still be hired when they do go back to the civilian force back in the United States. At the same point, I can tell you from my perspective, I've seen many job openings that have been available overseas where even people turning down like, that is not good enough for me. The pay is not good, even though I'm going to sit at home and complain that this base sucks and that I don't have enough money. That does happen on overseas military bases all the time where people do have opportunities to make their situation better, but then decide not to. Trust me, I've seen it more than enough. She says it's not just senior spouses who are asked to volunteer their time and energy to the command in unpaid roles that are baked into the core of the system structure. Most Navy commands require an ombudsman who acts as a liaison between the sailors' families and the CO. The ombudsman is usually a sailor's spouse. Whether or not a ship has a good ombudsman can drastically affect morale and family members' sense of well-being. It is a ton of hard work that requires specialized and recurring training. The only payment is possible reimbursement for expenses incurred if the command has a budget for it. There is a clear true value in the work spouses put in towards a command's overall success. The military, and in particular the Navy, is still operating on outdated models where spouses are often seen as an extension of the service member rather than as an independent, valuable individual. I would say this is kind of true, but the military already does try and compensate for situations like this. I'll give overseas, for example. There is something called cost of living allowance, which you are authorized when you go to overseas stations, Japan, Spain, Italy, these places where it's known to cost more money. Also, on top of that, that U.S. spouses have less ability to work, knowing that there are SOFA agreements, there are different agreements between these countries that only so many American workers can be there to how many local people from that country are able to work, and obviously those people do make more money. So to say that the military doesn't compensate for this is only kind of a half-truth. While you're stateside, it's kind of understood that you should be able to find some kind of work typically, but that is case-by-case basis and gets even more nuanced. I will agree also on the fact that yes, spouse has talked about this outdated system that military spouses and them being an extension. We are very much in the idea of nuclear families and people that are having kids and happy homes, and it's very 1950s like whenever you go to a military base compared to out in town where you see it's very much survival of the fittest. I will say that there are lower ranks that do really appreciate this benefit or factor to their military life, as it does create a blanket or some kind of security, I should say, where you're coming from a commander position. If you want proof that the military treats spouses as an extension of the service member, just look at how BH differs from those with dependents and without. On a very basic level, service members with a spouse or children are paid more, which I'd argue is a reflection of the expectations placed on military families as well as incentive towards family values. Pay shouldn't be determined by marital or family status, but rather based on responsibilities and roles of the individual, period. I don't want the Navy to get rid of the CO spouse school I've been invited to, or any program that can be beneficial. I'm not about to ask for fewer resources. The school isn't the problem. My understanding is that the message of the school is extremely positive. They reiterate that the CO spouse can have as much or little involvement as they want. While that's a great message, it doesn't negate the fact that there are understated expectations put on spouses at all levels. What I'm asking for is the military recognize and respect the labor of people who support it, pay the ombudsman, provide stipends for spouses who volunteer in critical roles, not just senior leadership spouses, but on all levels. Stop expecting unpaid labor. Our time has value. We have value. I'm sorry, Julie Zach, but your role as a military spouse, you're not going to get paid. And I'm surprised that your husband let this go out, because it does come across very much as this kind of entitled, I would say, but struggles to also annotate that there are other aspects to this where you are coming from a commanding officer, an 05 level rank, that you're saying the pay for housing should be based on their responsibility and rank. But I'm also saying, like, while your marginal difference of housing allowance that you're noticing, and you're like, he should probably get more, or maybe they shouldn't even base it on marriage at all, that means you could get less and you be not as affected. But there are people that are lower rank right now that survive on the margins of increased housing allowance that goes from single to married. So I think you're kind of only understanding one aspect of this entire argument, as the enlisted side is totally different, and I don't think you really grasp that. My message to this military spouse is learn your boundaries, learn to say no, learn to have that barrier. If you don't want to be involved, they've empowered you and they've even told you, if you don't want to be part of this, do not be part of this. Like, I also have to ask, your husband is a commander in 05. He can retire very soon, very well. Better than the, I don't know how many % of the rest of the U.S. military. I don't see why you haven't had this discussion where it's like, you get out, you stay home more. I get to not be pressured into doing anything extra. That sounds like a family event or frustration, not really a big military issue. If you are trying to erode away at this cohesion or people working with each other, not even on a basis of salary, but on just a basis of good human nature, are we taking away a core function of the U.S. military that's out there, where it's been known that we stick together, and some of these things need to still make the military kind of what it is? I would argue, I believe that still has a place in the military in 2021, but I want to bring this question to you guys. Do you think that this really does have a place in 2021, or do you agree with this military spouse here that says that we should have military spouses that are paid for some of their hours of work that are put into the command? But I'd like to know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you guys like what we do here on this channel, we do have a Patreon link down below that you can support the channel over at patreon.com, down in the description below for some special perks and benefits. Also, on top of that, we do have a YouTube membership link, which is down below this video, where you click join. Also on the main page as well for some special perks and benefits. But as always, if you have questions about this or anything else, you can always hit me up on Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, down in the comments below. I love you guys. I'll see you next time.